In 1970, during the papacy of Pope Paul VI, Archbishop Lefebvre founded the Society of St. Pius X, a priestly fraternity dedicated to preserve and promote the ancient liturgies, tenets, and traditions of the Roman Catholic Church, which are in stark contrast to the radical changes introduced by the Second Vatican Council. This morning, the Voice of Catholic Tradition will present an educational and revealing interview with Dr. Peter Wanowski, a respected authority on church history and a prominent Catholic author, lecturer, and apologist. Dr. Wanowski and host Joe Bagnoli discuss his recent article in the Catholic Family News entitled Dialogue is Impossible. Tradition and the New Religion Unfurl Their Banners, 1974 to 1976. Dr. Wanowski, a keen observer of all things Catholic, traces the history of the formation of the Society of St. Pius X, a history wrought with conflict and tensions dating back to its very foundation. The title of this article, Dialogue is Impossible, are the very words of Pope Paul VI after his last meeting with a truly great and holy Prince of the Church, Archbishop Lefebvre. Considering the current climate in the Catholic Church today, these words are proven to be sadly prophetic. Please listen closely to this fascinating interview, which will not only enlighten, but inspire.
Good morning, Dr. Wanowski.
Good morning, Joe. How are you?
Good morning.
Good to hear from you again.
Yeah, it's very good. Welcome back. Welcome back to the Voice of Catholic Tradition. We have a lot to talk about, so let's get started. We don't have that much time. Dr. Wanowski, in the October issue of Catholic Family News, you wrote an extremely interesting and revealing article on the unfolding of the difficulties between Archbishop Lefebvre and the Society of St. Pius X and the post-conciliar church. You picked a time period, especially during 1974 and 76, what we might call the formative years. And perhaps during the last 40 years of relations between the Society of St. Pius X and the Novus Ordo Church, the post-conciliar church, the facts concerning the birth and development of the Society of St. Pius X have become somewhat obscured and totally misunderstood. And your article presents us with the facts and, most importantly, the singular intent and objective of the post-conciliar church of Paul VI. So let me begin with this question. You begin by the description of what probably would be called an apostolic visitation to Cone, the seminary in Switzerland, back in November of 74. Could you tell us a little bit how this unfolded?
Sure. The Archbishop was already getting into trouble, and he knew he was getting into trouble because he rejected the new rituals and Novus Ordo. And suddenly he finds a letter in November 1974 indicating that he's going to have an apostolic visit by two Monsignori from Rome, from three Roman commissions, which had the backing of Paul VI himself. And this visitation was going to occur in 6 days. And of course, they had decided on the commission about 6 months before, but they didn't tell the Archbishop about it until 5 days before it was going to happen. And he informed his seminarians on that very morning. It was November 11th, which is a big feast day for the French, St. Martin. And he was, according to Father Aulnier, who was with him and spoke to him right before this visitation, he was worried because he realized that this was all coming to a head, that finally there would be this facing of Paul VI and then the Romans, and he dreaded it because his Catholic soul couldn't quite accept that he was in trouble because he was adhering to the traditional faith. It was very difficult for him to view that situation without dread. But the visitors came, and as soon as they only stayed for 3 days, but they must have made a real mark they did make a real mark on the Archbishop and all the seminarians and all the professors, because they basically acted in a totally impious way. They didn't go to chapel ever. They were never seen in the chapel. They were never seen to say Mass. They never attended Mass at the seminary. Plus, what they said, theologically speaking, so scandalized the seminarians that it really angered the Archbishop. And tradition, if I can say this, tradition as we know it in the modern our period came from that anger. What I would call, obviously, righteous indignation. They were saying, these visitors from Rome, remember, they're understood by the seminarians, because it was true, that these visitors are being sent by the Pope himself. And when they start saying things like, oh yes, celibacy is going to be dropped, and that's going to happen, no doubt about it, and when they cast doubt on the physical resurrection of our Lord, when they're doing these things, and when they're saying truth can change, and that doctrine can change, and this was their attitude in front of young seminarians who expect only orthodoxy coming from Rome, this was just shocking. And so it infuriated the Archbishop. And he says in interviews and letters to Rome that their attitude really infuriated him. And it produced what we know as the Declaration of November 1974, which was his statement of principle. So, yes, this was really shocking, and it brought Archbishop Lefebvre face to face with the new Rome, like he had never seen it before.
Right. It must have been quite an experience. And according to your article, believe it or not, he received a 99% approval rating.
I'm sure it was. Yeah, I'm sure it was perfect.
Oh yeah.
But they had to say it was imperfect.
Yes.
They had to say it was imperfect because that's why they were there, to find the imperfection.
Yeah, and the Monsignor,
or so-called imperfection. Yeah.
And that probably was the traditional Latin Mass, which contributed wholly to that 1%.
Right.
And I think that's. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, that's shocking in itself, that the traditional Mass said down through the ages, canonized by Pius V and Trent, would be the 1% not acceptable.
Yes.
That itself is shocking.
Yes, and the seminarians must have walked away from this with their heads spinning. Now, I think here at this point, Dr. Wanowski, if we could just take a little moment here to clarify some past situation. I've spoken to quite a few people who believe that, Archbishop Lefebvre was just a rebel, did something all on his own, never with any approval. I have two quick questions for you. Under which conditions was the seminary, the traditional seminary of the society, founded? I believe, if I'm not in error, this was done with the approval of Rome.
It was done with the Toleration of Rome. Yes, it was done by the local bishop, but already by 1970 there was problems. The local bishop, the Bishop of Fribourg in Switzerland, and then the local bishop at Econ, the Bishop of Sion, established this society and tolerated this society as a pious union, which they approved of. And Archbishop Lefebvre, and that would mean that all the seminarians trained by the Archbishop would have to be incarnated in some diocese. And by 1970, in 1969, 1970, the modernists were in control, totally in control. And there were some exceptions, but they were few. So he realized this wasn't going to work, that he wasn't going to be able to get his seminarians incarnated in these dioceses, so they had to be incarnated by the society. So he kept going to Rome to try to get what's called the status of the diocesan right, where he would have the right to incarnate in the society. Rome never gave him this right. So that's why it was so easy to suppress the society officially. All the local bishop had to do was withdraw his recognition, and that withdrawal of recognition was backed up by this evil Cardinal Secretary of State, Cardinal Vilo, and backed up by Paul VI himself. The withdrawal was backed up by Paul VI himself. I mean, the Archbishop was frustrated in his efforts almost from the beginning.
Yes, you can see quite clearly here that the battle lines are being drawn, and a developing situation. And now we can come back to your last statement. Ultimately, therefore, Archbishop Lefebvre is forced to issue what has become known as the Declaration of 1974. And can you explain, Dr. Wanowski, to our listening audience, what the purpose of this declaration was?
Well, he says himself, and we're sort of cheered by the whole thing, that it was born in his indignation at the attitude of the Roman visitors. It was 5 days after this visitation, he went to Rome to try to get this new situation for the society, the situation of diocesan rights. And there's an interesting scene where you have this Swiss guard, the Archbishop waiting for some meeting to begin and to be called in, and the Swiss guard says, well, Your Grace, you don't actually expect to get something from these people. this guard that had been frozen, it's like the rocks speak, the very Swiss guards themselves say, you're not going to get anything. We know these people. Right. It's not going to happen. And sure enough, he was given nothing. He was just continually given the runaround, and it was clear that he would, from the very beginning, that he would never get anything from the New Romans. So he went back after this meeting in Rome. He went back to the Society House in Albano and produced in one day what's called the Declaration of 1974. Which begins in that famous way: we cleave with all our heart and with all our soul to Catholic Rome, the guardian of the Catholic faith and of the traditions necessary for the maintenance of that faith, and to eternal Rome, mistress of wisdom and truth. That's just the beginning, and it's great. It's a magnificent statement.
It is.
When he went back to Akon, that's it. Isn't that it? That's it. That's what we stand for.
That's what we stand for.
We have to say more, Joe. That's what any true Catholic stands for. If you don't, you're not a Catholic. Period.
That's right.
We have to say it loudly.
And we have to say it loudly. He said it loudly at a time when chaos was breaking loose. Most people had no idea of what was going on in the post-conciliar time.
Right.
I'm talking about the average Catholic going to Mass on Sunday. I will put myself into that category. As a matter of fact, no idea what's going on. And he said something, this article is so strong, I recommend everyone to get their hands on it, from the October issue of 2013, the Catholic Family News. He had to explain what he and the Society of St. Pius X stood for. And I like to be, not only at that time, when he was making his speech, but for all time. And to me, that's a very powerful thing, and that's what the Society has stood for at that point.
Right.
And to read that whole statement, you just read an introductory part, is extremely powerful. And also, in your article, Dr. Wanowski, you claim that the December 74 declaration was clearly an attempt to raise the entire, this is very interesting, to raise the entire interchange between the Cone, that's the seminary in Switzerland, and the Vatican to the level where the ultimate battle was to be fought on the doctrinal level. Now, what do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, and if I can find it in this article, I mean that it wasn't a personal thing between Archbishop Lefebvre and Paul VI. It was about, and it wasn't just about the liturgy. It wasn't just about any kind of externals that we sentimentally adhere to. This was a matter of doctrine. And the Archbishop, and this is what we have to think about because it's true, in the 1970s, mid-1970s, Archbishop Lefebvre, and even in letters to Paul VI himself, says the conciliar church has established a new faith and a new religion. And that new faith and new religion is expressed in the new Mass. That's why we reject it.
Right.
And we adhere to the old Mass because it perfectly expresses the old faith, the Catholic faith, which it was intended to express. He says it over and over again, and he says it in the mid-70s. Somehow, for tradition is sort of going over today, going over the same grounds that Archbishop Lefebvre clearly settled. The whole issues were settled way back in the 70s, and there's no need to go back over them again, because the situation is exactly the same. Exactly the
Absolutely.
same.
And to be referred to, and we have been, as a group simply obsessed with bells and smells. To reduce this situation to that statement is ludicrous. And it has happened. It has happened. And you stated that the conciliar church, the Church of Paul VI, had no intentions of tolerating the old religion, and that the old faith, once its extinction orders had been signed, was over. And
yes,
and you clearly demonstrate that in your article, and I somehow see a comparison to the message that's being delivered today from the Vatican, that even though we had a brief respite there under Benedict XVI, the new message is we're questioning restorationists. That's our new term.
Yes.
We're questioning formal prayer. We're questioning papal formality. We're questioning the status of divorced Catholics, homosexual behavior, and on and on and on. In other words, the message is you old-timers better get out of the way. Am I correct?
Better get out of the way, and I'll say as many nasty things as I can about you. For example, comparing you to the people who stoned St. Stephen. Mm-hmm. That's what we're compared to, yeah. So, I mean, it's a serious level. No. And see, the thing is, Joe, there was just thin veils in these various papacies that exist that were since Vatican II. Paul VI had Humanae Vitae, sort of the thin veil covering the real situation. You had John Paul II, his pro-life language sort of veiling the real situation. Thinly, very thinly. And with Benedict, you had his at least tact, liturgical tact, veiling the real situation. Now, those thin veils are totally being ripped down.
Yes.
And we see what's been there all along, as we know, as anyone who had any contact with the Novus Ordo knows. This is the real situation. The old religion is not tolerable for them in any way.
No. This is a total frontal assault.
Except some kind of just some kind of sentimental attachment by old people who are just sort of stupid, I think. That's what they act like.
And that's the words they're using, right. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what kind of words they're using. Like, what are they? It's like some donkey or something the Italian translates as.
Right.
And so it's, this is how it's been viewed, but this is how it's always been viewed. Yes. And it's clear, and the Archbishop saw it, and he said it from the 70s. This is a new religion, one with which we refuse, because we adhere to the Catholic religion. And no one, no matter his position in the hierarchy, can tell us to do anything else, and has no right to tell us to do anything else. He said that in the 70s. He said that in the Doctrinal Declaration of 1974. That was quite a long time ago.
And nothing's changed. Right. And I guess, Peter...
Nothing's changed.
No. And I guess from this point on, the point we're discussing right now, the main thrust of the argument against Archbishop Lefebvre here it comes, is you're simply not being obedient. And you pointed out very well in your article. Let me ask you, obedient to what? What was the Archbishop supposed to be obedient to? Everything that was no longer Catholic? Were these the expectations? I ask you.
Right. As if the eternal law of God doesn't trump any kind of action of a ruler, a human ruler. Of course it does. And no, I mean obedient to what? I mean, recently you've had statements in which he says, Francis, for example, that atheists can be saved. The atheists can go to heaven as long as they follow their own conscience and do what they think is right.
Right.
This is grave.
Yes.
Because no longer, therefore, would faith be necessary for salvation.
Nope. No longer.
You know what that means? That the whole Christian religion is for nothing.
It's just a waste of time. Absolutely. I'm glad you said it's just a waste of time. And why are we bothering?
Faith is the whole thing. I mean, well, of course we have works. We're not Protestants, but faith, we're saved by faith.
Exactly. And we have a situation where the behavior coming out of the Vatican leaves no other message other than don't for 1 minute think the Catholic faith is unique in any way, shape, or form. And we're being beaten up with this either directly or indirectly. It's constantly coming at us. And you point out that in your article, and quite accurately, I would say that if it wasn't for the Archbishop Lefebvre and the Society of St. Pius X, we'd have no remnant of tradition today. It wouldn't even be there.
No public. I mean, there were priests running around. There were priests, I mean, not to use the word running around, but priests involved who realized things in the 60s, but no real public stance that everyone could hear. And that's one thing when I write about the Mass in Lille, France in August 29th, 1976. This was on the front pages. Yes. Everyone was listening in the mid-70s to what the Archbishop was saying. And so tradition was saved and grounded and given a public face, I mean, listen, Francis can't go a week without saying something about traditionalists.
No, you can almost go every morning.
It's still to this day, even though we're a microscopic part of the world, you can't get rid of it. And that comes from, the Holy Ghost and also the Archbishop's stance in the 70s when he said, no, the whole purpose of my office as a bishop and the whole purpose of the Pope's office is to defend the faith, because it's the faith that saves.
Absolutely.
And it's not that, nothing. There's no meaning to it all. What is the purpose of it? Exactly. To make us part of a new globalist order and have universal peace, which is just complete utopian insanity,
right? And it's been
ridiculous.
And it's been quite elusive to this point. If we can talk about utopian peace, and you referred in the article to a credo pilgrimage. This is very interesting too. You referred to a credo pilgrimage made by the Archbishop Lefebvre in May of 1975, and you discussed how that contrasted with an earlier pilgrimage made to Rome by a group, the New Charismatic Church, was like a Pentecostal group. And you contrasted, you didn't compare, you contrasted. Could you explain what you saw there? How the reception?
When you read about that situation, you see whose side Paul VI was on without the slightest doubt. There was this huge, and the remnants at the time said, well, you can't even compare it to, it would be blasphemous to compare it to a pilgrimage. You had 9,000 charismatics sort of swaying and passing out and sitting on the floor in St. Peter's Basilica, and they were given every privilege you could have. They said Mass at the high altar. Cardinal Sunens, who was the one who brought the Protestant charismatic movement into the Catholic institutional organization, He was given privilege. He was greeted to say Mass at the high altar. He was greeted by the Pope, and there was this bizarre scene in which the Pope, from Paul VI, from a side altar, gave a 10-minute speech in praise of the charismatic movement, and then threw up his hands and said, "Jesus is Lord, hallelujah."
Yes.
That's just bizarre. Bizarre behavior for someone who should be acting in some kind of dignified way.
Right.
This was what that man, Giovanni Battista Montini, had sought for his whole life.
Yes.
A new church, a new religion. And he saw this clearly, the charismatic movement, as a manifestation of that new religion and its triumph.
Absolutely. And if you could read not just your article, but many other things have been written, many other pieces have been written about Paul VI was not very much concerned with the destruction that was going on. His goal was to see the Novus Ordo Church succeed, no matter what. And he was willing to everything.
Absolutely. I advise people to find Father Luigi Villa's book, who just recently deceased, and his book, Paul VI Beatified, ?
Right.
It's an excellent account.
It is.
Of
outstanding.
What he was about.
So by April of 1975, Dr. Winoski, in essence, the Society of St. Pius X had essentially lost the right to exist as far as the Vatican was concerned.
Right.
And we were now in a situation where now it was, it was really the drawing of the two sides to see how far this could go. And there's something that you pointed out in your article as I'm watching the clock tick away here. Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre once said, and I'd like to spend a little time on this because it relates to the situation that's going on with Pope Francis right now. Marcel Lefebvre once said, and this is a quote, "They tell us you judge the Pope. It is not I who judge the Pope, but tradition." What does that mean in terms of the responsibilities of the true responsibilities of the Vicar of Christ?
Yes, well, the Archbishop said it in 1976 at the Lille sermon. He said if the Pope does not serve the truth, he's not a servant of the truth, he's not Pope. He said it, that whole office, the purpose of the office is to serve the truth. And what the Novus Ordo has done in the past 40 years, or even just, especially basically 40 years, has made their new popes into oracles of a new revelation. The God continually speaks a different revelation through these men, and you have the theology of John Paul II, and you have the theology of Joseph Ratzinger, and now Francis. I mean, it's almost like a new revelation. Well, guess what? That's not the Catholic faith, and that's not Catholic theology, and it never was. First Vatican Council said in 1870 that the Pope's purpose and the infallibility attached to his office demands that he simply repeat and pass on what was contained in the deposit of the faith, that he has no right to introduce any new teachings whatsoever.
Right. That's
First Vatican Council, and that's an infallible declaration. So, I mean, what is the papal office for? What is the church for?
Yes.
That's where we're having to raise this issue, which seems to be absurd, but it's not. What's it all for? You don't need the Catholic Church for salvation. And if it doesn't really bring salvation, if Islam or the Jehovah's Witness bring as much salvation as the Catholic Church or get you there anyways, well then what's it all for?
Well,
if you don't need faith to be saved, what's it all for?
Exactly, and we have to ask ourselves the question: has the Catholic faith simply become the byproduct of whatever Pope is recently holding office, quote unquote? Is that what the Catholic faith has
absolutely.
become? And it never was, and it can't be. And
No.
And in your article, a very tempting article. I'm sure the title is "Dialogue is Impossible." That's part of, and a lot of people looked at that and said, well, I guess they're referring to the recent breakdown of the talks between the Society and the Vatican back in 2012. But your last paragraph is unique, and you make it very clear that in the end, some of the final words between Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre and Pope Paul VI, it is Pope Paul VI. And you follow up with this in your next article, Catholic Family News.
Yes.
More to come in the next article in Catholic Family News. So those who are out there, make sure you get the Catholic Family News. It is Pope Paul who says dialogue is impossible.
Absolutely.
And that's it.
And that was his attitude throughout their meetings. It was impossible. You're just attacking me personally, and don't raise theological arguments, and I'm Pope, so just obey.
That's it. And it doesn't work that way.
No, I mean the Archbishop was the calm one. The Archbishop was the humble one. And he was always sort of trying to work out some way that there could be, get something positive out of this meeting. And Paul VI realized, he just said what is the case. Dialogue is impossible.
Exactly.
Between modernism, which rejects Catholic truth, and the Catholic faith. There's
Absolutely.
No possibility. You either got to convert to one or go over to the other. There's no possibility of dialogue.
No. We've
it's
unfortunately
a fool's errand.
Right. We've reached that point, and I'm sad to say that we're going to have to end our little discussion here this morning on that. But you've made it so very clear. That article made it so very clear as to how everything unfolded, and more to come in the next article. So. Peter, I'd like to thank you, Dr. Wanaski. I'd like to thank you so much for giving you this time, getting up early in the morning for us. And to get more on these earth-shattering developments between the Archbishop and the Vatican, please go to Dr. Wanaski's next follow-up article in Catholic Family News. And Dr. Wanaski, I thank you again. It's always a pleasure.
Much, Joe.
Oh, thank you so much, and all the work that you do. And we will talk again, and let's see what happens in your second article here.
Okay.
All right,
see how it goes. All right.
See how it goes. God bless you.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.
You have been listening to an interview with Dr. Peter Wanaski, who dispelled every rumor, innuendo, and false information regarding the Society of St. Pius X, its founder, and its mission. We encourage our listeners to obtain a copy of the October 2013 issue of the Catholic Family News for the full article, and subscribe to this outstanding traditional Catholic newspaper, which will feature Dr. Wanaski's next article on this topic. The Voice of Catholic Tradition is pleased to have presented this important interview, and is most grateful to Dr. Peter Wanaski for sharing his valuable time with us. In these times of confusion, doubt, and ambiguity, truth is the only remedy. Pope St. Pius X, foe of modernism, pray for us.